And we're back on the build phase, and today I'm going to pick back up with our set review series. I have already done A-Force and Defenders, and this is in somewhat chronological order. We're going to jump into Aliens. Now, out of all the 200 card sets, Aliens is probably the weakest, and before I dive into it, I just want to, go on a little bit of a history lesson, because this was an expansion that I suspect was being developed before Defenders and A-Force even came out. Maybe the base set had been out prior, long enough for them to get some feedback on it prior to the development of Aliens, but I'm not totally sure. We have heard a few times that Super Awesome Games works about a year ahead of time. I don't know if that was necessarily true way back when. The first set might have come out and then they said, well, let's see how this does before we work on anything subsequent. So I don't know exactly where in the developmental life cycle of the game Aliens was. But some of these cards give me the impression that the base set had come out, they had seen the Thanos mistake and realized, hey, we don't want to make that mistake again. And I think the power level on the Alien stuff was very much a reaction to getting Thanos wrong in the base set. And because of that, they were a little bit gun shy. They were a little bit gun shy about making things too powerful. And unfortunately, that results in a set that did not age particularly well. So one interesting detail about the Alien set, this was the first set where we saw different named locations, as well as the first appearance of Earth and space locations. Now, these naming of different locations to be sort of thematic within the battles box, I do kind of like. However, because basic locations are kind of a specific thing, the fact that they have not continued to give X-Files being an example, all of those basic locations are just named the same as every other basic location. They did this with Aliens, they did this with Predator, and then never again. And I don't think we're likely to see that type of thing again anytime soon. I think they realized that having the basic currency system all have the same names is probably the way to go in terms of overall game health. So, Fury 161, Saluka, Nostromo, these guys are all kind of unique. As a personal note, at my first midwinter, I encouraged my entire team to split their locations between, say, 2 academies and 2 Aurigas, specifically to play around Ronin, and that's not legal. So I think the first interaction that anybody on my team had with Bert and C-Stacks was them busting us on the live stream for having illegal deck builds with these mixed locations. So that's kind of a humorous note. All right, so let's dive straight in. I want to start with the main characters, and then we'll deal with extended incubation when we get further down. So starting with Lieutenant Ripley. This is a main character I have tried so hard to make work. I've really liked the idea of what she does. She lets you, while her stats aren't that great, 245 has famously been kind of the stat block of bad main characters. 245 is not good enough. It wasn't really good enough at the time when this card came out, and it has since been power crept almost outside of the range of playability. So 245 is an unfortunate stat block. She has on her this pseudo search effect that they used on quite a few cards early in Versus, where I guess again I'm going to take a segue into a history lesson. In old Versus, search was everywhere. You couldn't play a team that didn't have effective search tools. Generic search tools were the most expensive, most sought after cards in the game. During their existence in old Versus, they were at the top of the cards that every player needed playsets of, and that didn't change until the game died. And because of how search heavy old Versus was, I know that Danny and Ben wanted to create in the new Versus less pressure to run search tools, and therefore they didn't want powerful search effects in the game, because if they exist, then players feel like they have to play them, sort of like, and we've seen that to some extent. I mean, they were right in the sense that once Wakanda came out, anybody who's running equipment wants to run Wakanda. So they were correct about that. Where I think they maybe were a little bit wrong is that having search tools in the game does not inherently harm the game in any appreciable way that I can tell. But then again, I'm a player who comes at this from a little bit more competitive mindset the majority of the time, and maybe casual players trying to do janky things. Although if you're doing janky things, don't you want search? Anyway, the pseudo search lets you reveal the top 5 cards of your deck. You pick an equipment, put it in your hand. At the time this card came out, there was very little equipment. There were exactly 3 equipments, all of which we're going to go over in this box. And we didn't start getting really impactful, serious equipments till quite a bit later. It was a year later until we got Predator, which brought in some quality equipment. The net launcher notably is one that people have gotten really upset about at various times throughout Versus history. But auto-include equipments like Nullifier, like Serpent Crown, maybe auto-include's too strong, but those types of equipments didn't show up until even after that. So at the time that Lieutenant Ripley came out, the equipment pool was small. You could at most have 12 equipment cards in your deck, which if you're playing this main character, you probably want 12, and 4 of them were not very good, but we'll get to that in a minute. So she lets you filter the top 5 cards of your deck to look for an equipment and then put that into your hand. You have to play 3 equipments in order to level her up, and when she levels up, she gets respectable stats. 755 is fine. I would have liked to see a 6 on the defense there, given how weak her level 1 stats are, but still playable. And she gets this I can handle myself power. Now this power, search your hand, deck, and KO pile for an equipment and equip it to a character on your side. That's awesome. This last sentence about how the power can only be used once per game kind of sucks. And this is an example of, I think, the developers going, we overshot with Thanos. We don't want to have another super OP power, so let's limit this to once per game. And I think that sucks. I think if this main character would have had the ability to multiple turns in a row search for and play equipment for free, especially when this card came out, especially within the contents of this box, that's fine. The biggest bomb equipment in this box is the power loader, which we'll get to in a little bit, and +5/+5. Come on, guys. So unfortunately, Lieutenant Ripley, I think, is probably solidly tier 3. I like this card. I like playing with this card just for funsies, hanging out with my friends, but it's a very all-in deck. You either get the equipments or you don't, and you just lose. And even if you get the equipment, sometimes you lose. Lieutenant Ripley, out of the main characters in this box, thinking about this from a Battles Royale format, I think she's an easy one to rule out and not waste your time testing. In a broader format, if you want to try to play her with like Infinity Gems and things like that, I think that's fun, but it's very casual. This is not a competitive main character. Ripley number 8. I'm actually going to skip Ripley number 8 for now, and we'll come back to her in a minute. So Sister Ripley, So I'm an adult. I have no problem with cursing. But if we're going to put cursing on the card, can we just put the word there? Like, I'm not a fan of the asterisk thing. Just choose a different way to say that if you don't want to put swear words on the card. But anyway, main power, pay yellow, put a +1 counter on top of 2 characters in your front row. I will admit the only time I've seen this character played is in Fun K1 and Fun K3. Two of the Fun Ks that we've done, Carlos has played Sister Ripley. Otherwise, this card has not seen a lot of play. When 1 or more characters on your side makes a melee attack, Sister Ripley gains an XP. Really good in a format where you have 3 main characters versus 3 main characters. There's lots of characters. She can level up really fast. 3, 4, 5, whatever stats. In a Battles Royale game, the low drop company cards are a little bit thin because some of those slots got used for equipment. So maybe if you're mixing her with aliens, you might be able to juice this level up. But unfortunately, her level up feels pretty bad when you're limited to just this box. Sister Ripley levels up into a 5/7/5. Again, these stats, they're not unplayably bad, but in modern Versus cards, when we see somebody start with kind of a tepid level 1 stat block, they seem to get a bigger boost at level 2. And with aliens, again, I feel like they were a little afraid of putting out another Thanos level overpowered game breaking card, and as such, these stats across pretty much this whole box were suppressed. I'm going to try not to repeat that over and over again throughout this, but the time and the context in which these cards came out, I think, hobbles the set in some difficult to overcome ways. So she retains her level 1 power that lets you, for not the best exchange rate, you're paying 1 card for 2+1 counters, provided you have another character that's stuck to the board to give you a chance to play that power. So if we look at other cards that do something similar, like you won't like her when she's angry, you have to control a defender, and if you do, you spend 1 card, you get 2+1 counters. That's a pretty okay exchange rate. You don't have to control a defender here, although, again, because it's split across 2 characters, it has kind of a different requirement on it. Her other power is Sacrifice and Resurrection. If Sister Ripley is your main character, KO her and put Ripley number 8, level 2, from outside the game onto your side, stunned, as your new main character. So this, in effect, lets you get 2 extra hit points, but really only lets you get 1 extra hit point, because you can't take advantage of Sister Ripley's full 5 hit point pool. If you do, you're dead. So she essentially, if you want to use this power, she is a 4 HP main character, and Ripley number 8 gives her +2. So it's essentially acting as +1 hit point, changing to this other character. The stats stay the same. She's still a 5/7. She gains Acid Blood. Instead of being able to buff 2 characters on her side, you are now able to put -1 counters on Ripley number 8. As long as she doesn't KO herself, then you can put -1 counters on another character. So the alien Acid Blood, you get hurt, the blood comes out, it hurts other people. Like, thematically, that's pretty cool. Mechanically, you're making your main character -6/-6 to kill something that has 6 defense. I mean, depending upon board state, it could be good, but if you're doing this with a more or less naked board or with board parity, I don't know that this helps you. Also, the -1 counters that you get to put on the other side are limited to supporting characters, so you can't put a wound on the main character. You can't advance your win condition. This is purely a board control maneuver that seriously handicaps your main character. Sure, there are situations where it's going to be good, but you got to, use at your own risk. You are exposing your underbelly to go for this maneuver. I'm sorry, her other her other level 2 power. Pay an Earth, name a character, KO all enemy supporting characters with that name. Look at the enemy hand, discard each character with that name, search the enemy deck. So you get to wipe something out of existence. So it's like the Satana move, except you just get to name a character, and it hits everything. The board, the hand, the deck, the KO pile. It removes all copies of a character, and it's limited to once per game. Maybe this one, with Lieutenant Ripley, the once per game restriction seems, I think, absurd. With this one, the ability to fully delete something out of the deck in every possible way. But we now have a 7-drop that does that. Mulder in the Photographic Universe does this for a yellow, which is a easier to get resource than space, or Earth, sorry. And it's not limited to once per game. So I think, again, this is another example where the power itself is fine, but as the game has evolved, it's looked worse and worse over time. It's just been kind of power crept out. So would you want to play Sister Ripley directly? So if you're, or Ripley number 8 directly. So playing Sister Ripley, her level 1 does some stuff. Her level 2 lets you essentially heal and maybe throw a monkey wrench at your opponent in the midpoint of the game or late game. But Ripley number 8 herself, so she still has the Acid Blood power. This is both better and worse at level 1. She has a lower health pool, so her maximum number of counters is 3. And at that point in the game, 3 -1 counters probably is going to stun a bunch of things. I mean, less now than at the time when this came out. And she does have this maneuver where you can choose to level her up and heal all your wounds. Now, there are some timing stuff there. If your opponent has wound acceleration in their deck, you need to be really careful about when you choose to do the rapid cell regeneration and jump up to your level 2. But the level 2 analysis I've kind of already performed. Again, honestly, I don't see any of these three Ripleys being the card you want to play in a Battles Royale format, or probably in a competitive environment at all. They all do kind of interesting things. They are all kind of fun cards, but I do not think they are tournament competitive. Even within the limited Battles Royale format, I'm not sure that any of these Ripleys really get you there. Lieutenant Ripley in particular is probably the worst of the bunch because she's so dependent on equipment and there's so little equipment in this expansion. So the one Ripley that has actually made an appearance in serious gameplay circles, Warrant Officer Ripley. You can pay an Earth, daze a character on your side, but they keep all their equipment. And at the start of your build phase, Warrant Officer Ripley gains an XP for each wound she has. So she can hide, but if she hides, she's not collecting XP. She's got to take wounds in order to level up. I mean, one wound, if she takes one wound and then hides the rest of the game, she's still eventually going to level up because, well, no, this is the start of build phase trick. No, so that's after recovery. Yeah. So even if she takes one wound, after 7 turns, she's going to have enough experience to level up. So while these two powers, the hiding and the leveling, kind of have a anti-synergy, the way the level up is phrased and the way it works, it's fine. It's fine. It works fine. So her level up, once she gets there, she still has the ability to daze a character but keep their equipment, so you're hiding from your opponent's ability to wipe an important equipment off the board, which is way more relevant if that equipment that you're hiding or protecting is a Serpent Crown, well, no, Serpent Crown wouldn't work because of a nullifier. Some of the modern equipment is way more worth protecting than the stuff that came out in this set. And then her level 2 power is, at the end of the turn, stun all supporting characters. And again, limited to once per game. Couldn't you have just had us pay 2 blue and do it as many times as we want? 4/8 stat line kind of feeds into the defensive maneuver, the 2/5/5. I mean, it's not 4. Still kind of a weak stat block. Really, the thing that you want to do with Ripley, Warrant Officer Ripley, is you want to... This is an anti-aggro pick. If, as was the top 8 that she made, it's a Thor-heavy room, this is a card that can really stymie Thor or any other main character that wants to attack every turn. If there's nothing for you to attack, I get to just build my board and kind of do my supporting character stuff while keeping wounds off my main character and making it harder for you to level up. So while Warrant Officer Ripley has made serious tournament appearances, I'm not sure that it says as much about Warrant Officer Ripley as a card as it does the meta read for the specific tournaments where she showed up. So is this card playable just out of this box in Battles Royale? Not the character I would pick. I mean, I can't really keep it a secret. This is not the box I would pick if I was playing Battles Royale. This is probably the weakest of all the 200 card expansions, and all 4 of the Ripleys that are in it, within the narrow confines of just this box, I just don't think they do enough. Now, if what you want to do is introduce the game of Versus to somebody who is a big Aliens fan, this box is a great place to start. You get just this box, you can build just Aliens decks and just Company decks and smash them into each other, and if you're into the lore of Aliens, there's a lot to love in here. But as soon as you start taking a deck from this box and smashing it into, say, a Battles Royale deck made out of the MCU box or made out of the Fantastic Battles box, you're going to really feel the power creep that's happened over the past half decade in Versus. So I put all of the Ripleys at like tier 2, tier 3, at under the best of circumstances, maybe even less playability than that, depending upon the format. So let's move on to the main characters for the Xenomorphs team. I had to think about it. I always just call these guys aliens, but no, this team is officially the Xenomorphs. So Dragon, in the year that Aliens came out, at that Gen Con, Dragon did make top 8. And I think, again, that probably, I guess we'll do another Versus history lesson. So the base Marvel Battles came out at Gen Con 15, if memory serves. And then A-Force and Defenders came out the very beginning of 2016 with like a few weeks between each other. I don't remember the exact dates. Aliens came out at Gen Con, so August later that year, and was legal at the Versus tournament that year. This was pretty controversial when it happened. A lot of people complained about how, as much as I like Versus, I don't like this game enough to sacrifice my whole Gen Con testing with a bunch of new cards. The cards weren't even all spoiled in advance, which was problematic, and there was a very significant typo in one of the cards, which we'll get to later. So, while the Dragon does have some tournament appearances, or high-level finishes at tournaments, I don't know that that necessarily means this is a powerful Tier 1 type main character. I think it's more a product of the context and the meta at the time when this card was played. So, the Dragon, he's a 3/4/5, not a 2/4/5, 3/4/5. Creature keyword is on all these aliens. It just makes it so they can't hold equipment, and like thematically, I get how that makes sense. But as far as a restriction mechanic, if a character can't take advantage of equipment, which in Battles Royale, if you're choosing to run these aliens, that makes the few equipment that are in this box even less playable. You have less playable targets to put the equipment on. Not great. I don't think any of the Xenomorphs really deserve the creature tag. I get, again, thematically it makes sense for it to be there, but if you're going to deny these guys access to not only the equipment in this box, but all equipment that's ever printed in the entire game, maybe give them a little more stats. Maybe give them something that they do well, since you're taking this other thing away from them. Again, for thematic reasons that I fully understand, but for game balance reasons, the Xenomorphs, well, we'll get into it. So, his power is pay a green and ready the Dragon. That's great. Whenever the Dragon attacks, it gains an XP. That's also pretty good. I mean, you're really susceptible to freeze effects or effects where your opponent doesn't want to let you attack. Like Warrant Officer Ripley is not somebody you want to see if you're playing the Dragon, because she can really stunt your ability to level up. But as far as in a vacuum main character stuff goes, getting XP off attacking and being able to attack more than once per turn is extremely good. Those are both things you want to see on a main character that you want to turn sideways. Again, at level 2, he keeps the ability to ready, which is very good, very relevant at level 2 as well. His stats get much better, 6, 7, 5. I'll take that. Could have seen one more hit point here when he levels up, but this was before they did that. I think Legacy was the first example of a main character that had a hit point increase as they level up. I believe Warrant Officer Ripley was the first example of a main character that had a hit point decrease when they leveled up. He also gains the ability to pay a space, and the Dragon gets lethal for the turn, and if he KOs an enemy character, he gets to heal a wound. That's pretty good. So this is a well-designed, tight main character card. He wants to do one thing, he has multiple tools to do it well, and he then can, if you have to declare some attacks where you get popped back in order to chase down that XP, he has a way to make up for that by KOing things the opponent has and healing off of it, and you don't even have the opportunity cost of, let's say for instance you have a small something on your board and you have your main character. Well, maybe I really want the heal because I don't want you to be able to kill me when I pass turn back to you. Now with a normal main character, you'd have to kind of make a choice there. Do you go for the heal or do you go for the wound? Well, the Dragon, with his ability to ready, he can do both. He can go after some small, easy to beat up target and heal that wound, and he can stack another wound on the opposing main character. So out of all the main characters we've looked at so far in this box, this is definitely the best one, and ultimately he's probably one of the, if not the best main character available for either of these teams. Next, the Newborn, favorite main character of world famous YouTube sensation in the Versus community, C-Stacks. Also has creature. His power lets you put 3/+1 counters on the Newborn, but you only get to use it when your hand is empty. Kind of sucks. You're not going to be able to amplify to pay for that, because you're going to have the greens in your row, because you got to dump your hand before you can use this power. 3/+1 counters is actually pretty relevant. We've seen how much impact a card like Might Makes Right has had on the game, where you're paying the Might Makes Right, you're paying the green, and you're getting 4/+1 counters. This one only costs a green, doesn't cost that extra card, and you get 3+1 counters. Now you do have to have your hand empty, so in a way this power does have kind of an additional, not cost, but kind of a serious restriction. Being empty-handed is not a good feeling in most card games. Cards equal options, and if you have no options, your opponent can make attacks with a lot more confidence. They can behave in ways that they would not be able to if you had even one card in your hand. If they don't know what that card is, that puts certain restrictions and things that they have to think about. And anytime your opponent has to think about stuff, they have an opportunity to make a mistake, which is something we as serious card players want to take advantage of. So pretty big hurdle you have to get through to be able to turn this power on. But once the power's on, it's pretty good. The drawback is he's just a 3/3. So even if you use this power, now he's a 6/6. Now 6/6 is not a bad stat line. To this day, 6/6 on a main character is not a bad stat line. But again, to get there takes some doing. At the start of your main phase, if you may discard your hand, and if you do, the newborn gains an XP. So on turn 1, you can level up, but at the cost of all your options. So there's a fun tension here between what this character can do optimally and your ability to do anything else. And you can, of course, dump your hand to this guy, and then your opponent has some clean answer for these counters, and now you're just a 6/6. The thing about Newborn is, if he can snowball, if he's given the opportunity to get those 3 counters on there, and it can be used defensively, it's an any combat power. RAR is an any combat power. So you can use this. If your opponent comes at you and isn't paying attention, you can grow out of range of their attack. You can hit them back. It's just you got to have the card in your row. So you're not going to be able to take people by surprise if they're paying attention. His other power is, his level 2 power is pay a space, and if the newborn is defending, he gets ferocious and monstrous. So if I have to team attack, if you've been able to use RAR 2 times, 3 times, and you're at 12s or 15s, whatever you're at, you come at me with a big team attack. Oh, now my guy hits before your guy does, and I hit all your dudes. Now somebody has to make a pretty serious play mistake to attack into that. I wish there was some way that this also granted range, or maybe granted range instead of monstrous, or that this power was just balanced a little bit differently, because I like the idea of I don't want to misgender the newborn. I like the idea of the newborn being able to lunge at people shooting guns at them. That feels kind of thematic for the card, but game balance reasons, I understand why it's set up the way that it is. So Newborn certainly is playable if you're able to have access to things like Cypher and ways to dump your hand and then refill it. Leader is extremely good. You dump your hand, you level up, you then use Leader's ability and draw your hand back up to where your opponent is. Those options are not available to you in the Battles Royale format. So you're just going to be dumping your hand at some point and then hoping you can natural draw your way back into the game. And that seems real tough. In a wide open format where there's lots of tools, I think Newborn does have some legitimate game, although at like a solidly, tier 2.5 type level, this is a playable main character, but you are not coming to the table with the absolute tier 1 power level, even with a full toolkit. And within, again, the narrow Battles Royale silo, I don't think the Newborn should be your champion of choice. Perfect Organism creature, 5/2/5. I really don't like that 2 defense at all. 5 attack on a level 1, particularly in the era when this card came out, is quite good. Combat, pay a space. If Perfect Organism is melee attacking, the defender can't strike back. Well, that offsets the 2 defense. That's really good. Survivor, when the Perfect Organism survives a combat, it gains an XP. You cannot count on being able to gain XP off of the defense. Not with a 2 defense. You just can't. And there's not a lot in this box that's going to help you survive combat. There's no super senses in here. There's no shock to the system in here, although we'll get to the plot twist in a minute. So you need to level up early and quickly with Perfect Organism or you're just gonna die. You're just gonna fall behind and die. Now, surviving combat, even if you have good attacks, but you don't have the space to pay to prevent the strike back, you're in trouble. There's no range here. This is just such a difficult main character to make work. At level 2, 9 attack, which is awesome. That is a stat that's still a 9 attack on a level 2 main character to this very day has not been power crept out. That's still a very good attack stat. But 3 defense and 5 health. Doesn't feel very good. Retains the ability to prevent getting struck back by defenders, and also gains the ability to make it so attackers can't strike. So basically gets the other side of the level 1 ability as the level 2 ability, and instead of having to pay a space for it, you pay a yellow, which is a more easily accessible resource. You can have the basics. Although I guess within the Battles Royale format, you'd have it on the basics and have it on... Here, you'd have the space and the yellow on the main. So the difference, if you're playing just Battles Royale, the difference between space and yellow is kind of negligible if you're on the Xenomorph team. Being able to prevent wounds when people are attacking you is nice, but it's limited to melee attack, so they need to have a ranged attacker, and the ranged attacker could be a 1-drop. A 2-drop is going to have enough attack to put a stun on the perfect organism. So... do you want to play this guy? Probably not. One thing that is good about this box is this is the box that Kane came out of, and I'll get to this guy in a minute, but he does really help you hit the locations that you need to hit. So some of these riskier plays, the way to hedge against straight up missing these absolutely essential locations that are going to allow you to survive till deeper in the game, that answer is packed into this box. So from a Battles Royale perspective, that definitely brings a little bit more playability to this guy, but probably tier 3, maybe some tier 2 matchups. Not a super strong card, though, unfortunately. The Queen. Okay. This is another main character I've spent way too much time on trying to make work, particularly in the era when this came out, because as far as Swarm characters, we had Madame Mosque on the Femme Fatale team, the 1-drop that if you power her up with another copy of her, you put the other copy into play, which seemed like a really cool way to stack some XP on the Queen. And we had Ultron, and then we had the few that we get in this box. So there weren't that many Swarm characters available, and within this box, there aren't that many Swarm characters. So for Battles Royale, I would fully rule this main character out. I wouldn't even consider her playable for Battles Royale, just given how few ways she has to get experience. The way she gets experience is when a character with Swarm appears on your side. If you already have a character with that name, the Queen gains an XP. If you're relying on characters with Swarm, you almost have to hold them back and play them on the same turn. So I don't play a 1-drop this turn and a 1-drop next turn. I play the two together just to make sure there's not removals to suck up that XP, because at 256, while this is a better stat block than most of the other main characters in this box, it's not good enough. You can't afford to stay at a 256 and expect to win the game. You've got to hit that level up. When you hit the level up with the Queen, she becomes a 6/6. This is 6/6 on a level 2 has not been fully power crept out of the game, especially if you can get to that level 2 by like turn 3 or 4, which the Queen could in the right deck. But again, inside just this box, to me, that seems like a big ask. She gains the ability to search your deck, hand, and KO pile for an Ovomorph and put it into your back row. And then any Ovomorphs that you have get an attempt to hatch. So we'll get to Ovomorphs here in a second. I really like what the Queen does. I love the Ovomorph is maybe one of the cards that I was the most excited about the spoiler and the most disappointed in how it actually performed once I got it into my hands. And this main character taking advantage of that really cool capture mechanic. This is the first time we saw that. It just all seemed super cool and fun, but it's solidly casual play, I think. I would love to see a competitive deck that uses these mechanics because I think they're cool mechanics, but I can't pretend they're better than they are. They're pretty wonky. So out of all the main characters in this box, there's a few that I think have playability in a broader format outside of Battles Royale. And within Battles Royale, if I had to play this box, I'm probably going to play the Dragon. And that's it. Maybe Newborn. Maybe Perfect Organism, but probably not. If I'm going to a Battles Royale event that I intend to take seriously and I have to / want to play the Aliens box, I think the Dragon is really the only option in that kind of narrow format. Now, again, a friend who loves Aliens, doesn't know Versus, wants to get in the game, this is a great place to start. Oh, you can play, what's your favorite Alien movie? We'll play with that Ripley. There's a lot of cool things you can do within it, and I'm not saying that this box sucks at all. I have a lot of fond memories of this box, but again, being objective about it, if you're going to a Battles Royale event and what you want to do is give yourself the best chance of winning, and you don't care about card theme or affinity for the IP, I think probably there's one main character that your choices are limited to, or you play a different box. So moving on to the plot twists. As you can see here, we don't have any company plot twists. So that sucks for the company. We do have one plot twist featuring company characters that is a generic. This plot twist has seen utility in a couple of extremely narrow situations over the years throughout the life of Versus. This is a decent plot twist to play in Rogue simply because it can be used on both the attack and the defense, and Rogue as a main character is so dependent on adjusting her stats on attack and defense. This also was prominently featured in the first Fun K and sucked for me. Theo used this card against me to great effect multiple times in that game. But in general, this is an extremely anemic, tepid plot twist. I get that they didn't want to make it equal +2 attack or +2 defense because flexibility is a value in and of itself. So that I don't know what the thought process was from the designers, but I think the reason they made this such a weak plot twist is because it is so flexible. A card like Find Cover gives +3 defense. A card like Open Fire gives +2 attack. Those things already existed, and it feels like they took one off of each of them as a way to compensate for how flexible this card is and called it good. I don't think it's good. I think this card is too weak. I think this is a bad card, and you only play it in the extremely narrow circumstance if you need the flexibility to adjust either attack and defense, either while you're attacking or defending, and there are no other options. Otherwise, don't play this card. Build the Hive. So this card, the first time Adam Logan came on the podcast, it was to talk about this card and Build a Better World and card value in general and how much some of these effects are worth. So the problem with Build the Hive is it's very difficult to evaluate, because if you simply look at it as I'm using one card to deny you one card, it's probably a bad value. If it just in a vacuum, playing a Build the Hive to take away some random superpower at some random point in the game from your opponent, the option of that is not good enough. The only reason you play this card is in a known meta where you know what superpowers your opponent's going to be dependent on. You take away Luke Cage's greens. You take away, to keep it within this box, the Perfect Organism's yellow before you declare that attack. You take away Lieutenant Ripley's red. These kinds of things. You take away the Newborn's green before you declare that attack, so he can't use RAR. So you have to use this card in conjunction with a known threat. If you're just throwing this card on the table to deny your opponent some superpower whenever, whatever, it's not good enough. It's not good enough value. This has to be a specific thing that either protects you from some actual threat or denies your opponent some form of advantage. And if you're using it in any other way, I think it's a wasted card. Because of that, it's tricky to fit into decks because you don't necessarily know what your opponent's going to be playing. In like a fight night where you know in advance your opponent is on such and such main character, then maybe you know how dependent they are or are not on superpowers, and maybe this can make an appearance. But in an open format, like if you're walking into a Swiss room, I think it's really difficult to stick this card in your deck not knowing what your day is going to look like and not knowing how superpower dependent your opposing characters are going to be. Because if I build a deck that's all reliant on like plot twists and keyword powers because I don't want to deal with locations, well, all of a sudden Build the Hive is just a dead card in your deck. Again, it has some utility, and in the hands of a skilled player, I think there is value in this card, but I do not think this is a card you just throw into your deck just because. I think you'd be better served having more supporting characters on a drop slot where you're thin than just throwing this guy in. Chest Burst. So this is arguably the best plot twist in the Xenomorph kit. Putting 2 -1 counters on a character that's in the combat. Now, it is limited to melee attack, which kind of sucks, but it does work on attack and defense. So you can shrink an attacker to the point where they can't mess with you. You can grow and prevent the attacker from hitting you. Well, I guess you're not growing, you're shrinking. But you can bring their defense down to where you can strike it. You can bring their attack down to where they can't strike you. And you can use this as a combat pump when you're attacking in to shrink somebody's, basically the opposite of what I just said. Very versatile card. Almost, in some situations, in some decks, this is a reason to splash some Xenomorph stuff in just to get access to putting more counters on the board. If you compare this to something like You Won't Like Her When She's Angry, that can only be used on a defender, and it permanently gives your character a buff. Well, permanent in the sense that until I get stunned or whatever, obviously. This one, while it's quite similar in how it affects the raw numbers of the game, -1 counters probably aren't going to stick around. You're probably not using this to bounce an attack that you're not getting a crackback on. So these -1 counters, this card could almost say, give a character -2 for the combat. It doesn't. It's a little bit better than that, but ultimately, in most use cases, I do think that's where this card ends up. That the counters don't stick. They result in an immediate stun. Well, they result in a stun at the end of that combat sequence. So this is a great combat pump, but you can't rely on that stat adjustment to be durable. You have to think about it as being a just for the combat kind of use case most of the time. Spook. Now this card, kind of like Build the Hive, denies your opponent the ability to do something. It takes away a character. And this has been used to great effect in conjunction with Deadpool, both in the Mimic Deadpool decks that came out in Gen Con 19, as well as just plain Deadpool MC straight up with a Xenomorph package, which I actually lost to at Midwinter 1. This exact card with that exact plan. This is good for equipment removal, removing stacks of green counters, getting an annoying blocker out of the way. There's lots of utilities for this card. So if you're running Xenomorphs, this feels like something you want to run. Now, it does kind of suck to daze a guy, but not actually remove him, not actually put wounds on him. But there's plenty of circumstances. There's plenty of use cases where that's exactly what you need to do. You just need this guy out of the way so you can hit the main character and put one more wound there. I think Spook is a very playable, very good card. I'm not necessarily sure that this is a card you run Xenomorphs to get access to. There's probably other ways. Well, there definitely are other ways. Like, do I run this guy or do I run Boomerang on 4? You know what I mean? But in a Battles Royale situation, I think this card would be very useful. I think it's certainly one of the top plot twists out of the somewhat small plot twist pool here. Yeah, definitely Spook and Chest Burst are the two best out of the 4 available plot twists. Wayland Yutani, I suppose it's worth mentioning this does not use green, and the alien one does not use red. Okay. Let's hop onto the equipment. Okay, so the M41A Pulse Rifle. This gives a character range, and it gives them +3 attack while making a ranged attack. It does not permanently give them +3 attack. The grenade launcher power here of putting 3 -1 counters on a single enemy back row character certainly has some utility. I don't think it's why you play the equipment. I think generally you're playing this equipment because it's a one-cost equipment and you have, say, Lieutenant Ripley out there. As far as what it does, the range plus 3 attack, sure. Within just this box, range is pretty powerful because basically none of the xenomorphs have range. So in terms of balancing this box against itself, the range is a very relevant power. The plus 3 attack is relevant because the stats on almost every character in this box sucks. Is this good enough to play in Battles Royale? Maybe. If you're on this box and you're on company as your team, probably it could make an appearance. It's not a bad card, but it's been, I think, outclassed by other cards that fill a similar role. If you look at the blaster pistol in Shield, does kind of a similar thing as far as the attack buff and the range, but the superpower that card has lets you KO an equipment. I think KOing equipment's probably better than 3-1 counters on a back row character. And if I'm able to stick this to the board and you know it's there, why are you putting people in the back row? It was okay when it came out, and it has unfortunately gotten worse over time. Moving to the next equipment. Where is it? There it is. Mother 6000. Oh. Cost 2. Pay a yellow. Draw 2 cards. So it costs you 2 cards. The Mother itself has to interplay, so it's a card leaving your hand. The yellow has to be spent, so that's an option leaving your option pool to draw 2 cards. So you're paying 2 to cycle. That is just not good enough. It's not good enough. It's just not good enough. You're spending 2 cards to draw 2 cards. So you're taking 2 cards that functionally don't do anything and replacing them with 2 different cards. Why wouldn't you just run different cards in your deck? I just don't think this card is good enough. I understand I'm being a little bit unfair saying that the 2 cards you spend don't do anything. They do let you draw 2 more cards, but what I'm getting at is I have 2 cards. I have a yellow and I have a Mother. I use them and I gain 2. So the net result in my hand, in my option pool, is exactly the same as if I just didn't run this card and ran 2 other things that just do something. Now, where this card could be good is if you can get it to stick to the board. If you can play it out and you get to spend 2 yellows on it. So if it survives at least 1 turn and you end up drawing 4 cards, now you've spent 3 and you've gained 4. Now you've got some advantage. If you can stick it around for a 3rd turn, we're now talking about 3 of your available 4 to 8 yellows in the whole deck to get 6 cards. But that's not super realistic either. Maybe just within this box. Maybe if you're playing, again, the scenario of I have the aliens battles and I'm only going to build decks out of this and have fun with my friend fighting within this IP, then maybe this card has some playability. But in a broader pool, even in a narrow or broad pool like Battles Royale, this card is not good enough to play. It's just not good enough. The final equipment that shows up in this set is the Power Loader, and it gives a character +5/+5. You lose and cannot gain range, but you do get +5/+5. Now, this is pretty good in conjunction with Lieutenant Ripley. If you can just out of nowhere pay a red and give somebody a +5/+5 buff and start smashing things earlier in the game than you should have. But that requires you to level up Lieutenant Ripley, which is 12 out of 60 in Battles Royale. It's probably not going to happen. Even in a broader pool, and if we're talking about a broader pool, is this going to be the card you want to go with? I think if we're talking about a broader pool, if you want a big damage burst, what you're going to do is spend Lieutenant Ripley's red. You're going to go get a power gem, not a power loader, and you're going to give your whole board +10 attack, something like that. So I think this card, while I don't think this card is bad, I certainly think it has some applications and some playability. I think it's held back by the power creep that's happened and the fact that you have to have a company character stuck to the board in order to play it. So you either have to be on a company MC, all of whom are not that great, or you have to run some of these low drop company guys, which are also not that great. So the playability, this card is held back by its playability restrictions, whereas I think the text box is actually pretty decent on the card. So let's dig into some low drop company characters. I guess, do we want to do all here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do company and xenomorphs together. I'm just going to go through all the ones, then all the twos. So one of the swarm cards that's available in the deck. This is, I believe, the first appearance of the keyword Legion. And accelerated growth is completely meaningless. I've played a ton of decks that have run a full 8 adolescent xenomorphs. I can count the number of times accelerated growth has actually procced on probably one hand. It just is not a relevant power. You don't want to, sure, if on turn 1 I play 1 and somehow it doesn't die, and on turn 2 I play 2, then this guy ends up as a 4-4, the second one that I played is a 3-3, and the first one remains a 2-2. Okay, but that's still not super powerful. It's not super fast. They're basically blank otherwise. Yeah, a 4-4 on turn 2 is not terrible, but look at how many things 3 of the 7 or I guess 9 cards I've looked at have to be this thing to get that line. It's just not good enough. I think the reason you play Adolescent Xenomorph is if you're in a deck like Mimic Deadpool and you absolutely want to have access to Spook. So you run these as a cheap way to activate that card. And other than that, I guess maybe if you're on a Xenomorph loyalty deck or you just want to play aliens because you like playing the aliens, these are reasons. This is not an unplayably bad card, but it is, I don't think, good enough to include in your deck if you're going to a tournament wanting to win, unless you have a very narrow, very specific reason for wanting to include it. And even as I reference the Mimic Deadpool lists, the Mimic Deadpool lists that had success generally weren't running the Xenomorph package. Like the team I was testing with, we learned pretty early in testing for that Gen Con that the Xenomorph package was not the optimal way to run Mimic. All right, Newt, don't play this card. Moving on. No, I'm kidding. So Newt, when she gets attacked, you put her back into your owner's hand. This is a speed bump card. This is sort of like trying to do what Iceman from the Marvel battles does, but worse. You know, Iceman, you prevent your opponent from attacking. Newt is letting your opponent attack, but trying to force them into having a crappy, wasted attack. I'd rather just not let my opponent attack because there's so many things, XP conditions, the Berserker keyword. There's so many things that so many decks where your opponent can benefit from the ability to attack. If I want a 1-drop that disrupts your ability to attack, I'm going to run Iceman. And so is everybody else, which is kind of why I hate that card now. Newt is just a flat-out worse Iceman. Trying to do the same thing, does it worse. I don't know why you would want to play this card other than maybe some very narrow deck. Maybe there's a deck where you really need cards in hand, but you also need to recruit. There's probably some very narrow play space for Newt. I know there's at least one deck where I ran her as a 1-of, although I cannot remember what main character it was. Maybe Madam Hydra? I don't know. I don't remember. Not a very good card. Ovomorph. This could possibly be the most disappointed I've ever been in a card in the entire history of Versus. I read about this whole hatch, capture a guy with a face hugger thing, and I loved it so much. And the only games where I've ever had it be relevant is when I was specifically playing Alien versus Predator Sealed, where you get a box of aliens, a box of Predator, mix all the cards together, and then draft. Yeah, not Sealed, draft. So in a draft pool that I played at Midwinter 2? Yeah, Midwinter 2, 3. Whatever the Runaway Chopper year. I did a draft pool. That's where I met some of the Tennessee guys, which was awesome. It was a great time. And this card performed there. It's the only time it's performed well for me. Outside of that, if you're trying to run a queen main character, it struggles. The problem with the Ovomorph is things have to line up. So you play this guy out, and he doesn't do anything the turn you play him. He just sits there. And if your opponent can stun him, we're done here. If they can't, and he's around at the start of your build phase, then you draw a card from the face hugger pile, which consists of 1 copy of this, if I remember right. I think it's 1 copy of Extended Incubation and 3 face huggers. Might have to check the rules. It's been a while since I played with these. So you have a 25% chance of doing nothing after your 0-4 that took your entire turn 2 to play survived a turn. So you play it does nothing. If you're behind on the board, you're still behind, probably even further behind because of opportunity cost. It has to survive your opponent's turn 3, and then it has a 25% chance to still do nothing. Oh, and if your opponent just doesn't play a supporting character into the Ovomorph until they can deal with it, then it does nothing. If it gets to do something, let's see, where's the Facehugger? If it gets to do something, you take your opponent's supporting character, it goes underneath this horribly statted 4-drop, and it sits there and does nothing. You have to wait a whole nother turn where your opponent has to not be able to get into 6 defense to get their character back or use counters or whatever else. And if that happens, then you have to pay a space, and if you do, you KO the captive character and you get to put a Xenomorph character from your hand into your back row. Putting a character from your hand in your back row is absolute gravy. I don't think I've ever seen it happen in any game at all. It has never been a relevant play. The only thing that's relevant is the Ovomorph in and of itself is a removal. It gets something out of your opponent's... Oh, and that's the other thing. If you have multiple Ovomorphs, they get worse. Because if there's one Ovomorph out there with a trap guy, that means your Facehugger pile is now 2 Facehuggers and 1 extended incubation. So now you're at a 33% chance of failing. If you have 2 out, then it's a 50% chance of failure. And the 4th Ovomorph in the crazy world where you get 4 Ovomorphs in play at the same time, the 4th Ovomorph is a 100% chance of failure. It's just... there's so much working against this card, but it was such a cool idea. I love the flavor of it, but it's just not good enough. I don't think you can use it as a reliable way to ramp out or cheat in Xenomorphs sooner than you would have been able to legally play them. It's just not reliable at all. It costs too much to do it. It's too slow. There's just so many problems with the Ovomorph, and being in the Battles Royale format, I don't think fixes them. I think the only reason I had success with this in a draft format is specifically because draft is even wonkier than Battles Royale. It's even more limited in weird ways. So, unfortunately, poor little Ovomorph does not seem to get it done. Oh, is this the first instance of a side stack? The Facehugger? I think the Facehugger stack is the first instance of a side stack. So, another versus history lesson. Vreese, 1 cost, company affiliated 2/1/2. He cannot move. And when he gets stunned on an enemy player's turn, put a -1 counter on an enemy. Okay. Pretty anemic. I don't like that you can't move him. I mean, you don't think about immobile as being a big deal, but that's because we're so... Oh, yeah, okay. Goblin Pile came before the Ovomorph side stack, so that's incorrect. This was not the first instance of side stacks in the game. Immobile, it's not a big deal until it is. There's going to be those situations where you really need to throw somebody up front to speed bump your opponent, and this guy doesn't let you do it. I was going to say I do not understand why they put this drawback on the card, but I do. He's in a wheelchair. Ha ha ha. He's immobile. Ha ha ha. So for theme reasons, I guess that makes sense. For gameplay reasons, I think it takes a more or less playable 1-drop and kind of just pushes him. I don't want this card in my deck. I don't want this card in my deck. Call. Definitely one of the 2 most played cards out of this expansion. An absolute staple. A bomb card that is just fantastic. This is easily one of the 2 best cards in the box, probably number 2 if I'm being honest. For me personally, with A-Force Loki being one of my favorite cards, I think Call is better than Kane, but if I'm being objective, not putting my personal top spin on it, Kane probably has more applicable use cases than Call, but Call is a great card. If you have to play her, and you never want to play her, but if you have to play her, that's not even punishing. A 2/2 with range and 3 health for 2 cost, that's a great card. It doesn't do enough. I wouldn't play her as a blank 2/2 range with 3, but if you're in a pinch and you have to get her out on the board just because you have to recruit something, you're not punished for recruiting her. She's a decent recruit for the cost. 3 health on a 2-drop with these stats, and that's fine. That's all fine. Again, not optimal, but fine. You're not punished for it. And this Full of Surprises power, where you can use her to power up any character in the game. Now, it does suck a little bit that you can't use her to power up Punisher 2099 and get his awesome, extremely lethal power. But outside of that, she triggers any power-up things. If you need to power up Spider-Man 2099 and cancel a combat, if you want to draw 3 cards off Loki, if you just need the +1 counter, on and on and on. It's a card that works both ways if you're playing rogue main character. The use cases for this card are legion. She might as well be blue. She might as well be a plot twist, because generally I think of Call as a plot twist that says power up a character, and if things are really going bad, you can play her as a character. So I don't think of her as a supporting character with extra utility. I think of her as a plot twist that can maybe hit the board if you're really in a pinch. This card is phenomenal. This is a reason to buy the Aliens box. If you're a serious Versus player and you really want to get into the things about Versus that make the game awesome and have all the tools at your disposal, this is a tool that you cannot ignore. You cannot overstate how valuable Call is to the larger game of Versus. Now, within a Battles Royale format, is there anything in this box at all that cares about being powered up other than just trading a card for a +1 counter? No, there isn't. So, in Battles Royale, I still think you play her if you're on company, because you don't have plot twists really, and because she's both a body and a plot twist, that flexibility is worth quite a bit. So I still think this is a playable card, even in Battles Royale, but the thing that makes her a tier 1 must-play, absolute, one of the best cards enduring for year after year in the game, is interactions with things outside of this box, like Floki and so on. Also, the health droplet being white to imply the android, to me, at the time, I thought this was something that was going to be coming soon, that they were going to start making use of the different color blood droplets for things. I think that's happened exactly once on the Jungle Hunter MC and never again, and it didn't take into account this color blood droplet at all. So, missed opportunity, planted flag for some kind of future game mechanics that maybe we'll see if they ever revisit this universe again. I would have liked to see characters in the Marvel universe like Vision, who's an android, have this kind of blood droplet. Like all robots across Marvel and all the different IPs use this kind of thing. I would like to see them take advantage of the difference between a red health droplet and a green health droplet and a white health droplet. And maybe there's an alien that has blue blood, like it's an area on the card that there is some space that they could innovate and do some things. They haven't. I don't know. Call's a great card. Worth buying the set for. Okay, Captain Dallas. This guy is a 2/4/1. You have your orders. At the start of your main phase, put a +1 counter on another company character on your side. Okay. He's a 2-cost 2/4/1. If this guy had 2 health, I would think he's playable, because you're going to get that +1 counter twice. If you just think about this guy as being a 3/5 on 2, that's okay, but it doesn't feel good enough. And he can't be a 3/5 because this has to go onto another character. But if you just put all the stats that Dallas brings to the board and composite them and think about him as just being a blank 3/5, do you want to play a blank 3/5 on 2? I mean, it is overstated. Like 5 defense on turn 2 is legitimate. But if you don't have another company character, then he's only a 2/4, which is... It's not so bad that it's pure trash, but it's not very good. This is not a card I want to put in my deck. Why is it not loading? Uh-oh. Apparently the site didn't like Ferocious Xenomorph. Long time ago, when I was talking to Danny and Ben on the podcast, and we were talking about the names of the Xenomorphs, we talked about specifically how the one with Ferocious was called Ferocious Xenomorph, and how Danny thought that naming was maybe too on the nose. I think it's kind of perfect. I like the way they named these xenomorphs and such. From the name, you can kind of tell what it does for the most part. There's a few exceptions. 3-2-1 with Ferocious. Okay. He's got Swarm. That could help out the Queen if you're playing the Queen in this box. All these xenomorphs have Swarm, but again, in order to just to circle back to the Queen, the problem with the Queen, I misspoke a little bit earlier. I was talking about the lack of Swarm. That's not the big issue. The big issue is you have to stick a Swarm guy and then play another one. So these 3-4 cost Swarm guys, they're not going to help the Queen level, because you're not going to play a 4-drop and then on turn 5 play another 4-drop to get your XP. You're already losing. Ugh. Dry air here in the winter. Okay, so Ferocious Xenomorph. If you're on Xenomorphs, Ferocious is a good keyword. The stats are playable, I guess, at turn 2. If you're in this box for Battles Royale, this is a card you're probably going to play just because it's in the 2-drop slot, but it's not something I'm excited about. Okay, Kain. Probably the best card in this box by a wide margin. Almost certainly the best card in this box. Call and Kain are the reason people buy Aliens boxes in multiples, because these cards go everywhere. The Explore power on Kain is single-handedly one of the most important, most defining, most impactful keywords on the game of Versus for years. There are game strategies, like if we look at the Quarantine Cup 2, the rogue deck that had only blues and the rogue deck that had blues and greens, and how only blues with Kain, you always get the card you need for that superpower. Ralph Edwards has self-labeled himself as the first person who ever ran Dark Phoenix with only yellow basic locations to activate his Kain. I don't know if that's true or not. He says it is, whatever. But it is true that Kain and only basic yellows in a Dark Phoenix deck, guaranteeing you draw those yellows, is a very good combination. The list just goes on and on. If you have a deck where you have to have your superpowers, you have to play Kain. Almost in every circumstance. This card has so much utility, so much versatility, so many playable cases in so many different decks. It is easily, hands down, the most seen, most played card out of the Aliens expansion at high level Versus, for sure. It's not that close, if I'm being objective. Again, for me personally, I think Call is probably my favorite card out of this box, but if I'm being objective, I think Kain definitely takes that cake. Again, Call and Kain are the reason people buy the Aliens box. It's so good. Those two cards are so good. Leaping Xenomorph, 4/1/2 with Leap. This Xenomorph I actually like. I think 4 attack on turn 2 with the ability to get over the top of somebody and then do it again the next turn is quite good. I wish more of the Xenomorphs were kind of aggressively statted like this. If you look between this 2-drop and the other 2-drop, if they were both just 4/1s, I think they'd both be pretty good. This one is just held back in these weird ways, and I think, again, there was some shell shock after how broken Thanos was in the base set that led to some pressure, some downward pressure being applied to this entire Aliens box to make sure there wasn't anything super broken, and instead we ended up with a lot of things that are super anemic. Xenomorph Ambusher, 2/3/1. His power is camouflage, can't be attacked while it's in your back row. If you are playing a deck with machines, or if you're playing a deck that absolutely has to have Xenomorph Plot Twist for some reason, this guy's playable. Outside of those use cases, he is not playable. And even if you're playing with machines, there's a lot of ways to get at that 3 that doesn't involve attacking him. So it's more of a speed bump than he is actual durable protection. And week over week, when I was in the Monster Mash format in Quarantine Cup 2, week 1 of that, I played First Evil, and I had these Xenomorph ambushers in the deck to protect my COSs. Week 2, I took all the Xenomorph ambushers out because people can just get through them, and I'd rather play something that that is more impactful, that does something positive for me, as opposed to makes it slightly harder for my opponent to get to my COS. So very niche use cases for Xenomorph Ambusher. As more machines enter the game, this guy may end up being better. He was definitely in my Dark Beast deck when I was running machines, although, again, ultimately I ended up cutting him because he just doesn't quite get there. And if your opponent can pick him off with an out-of-combat stun or with -1 counters of some kind, now your machines are totally vulnerable. Whereas if you just played a good 2-drop, maybe they couldn't get through it as easily. Acid Blood Xenomorph, 4/3/2. When he attacks or defends while wounded, put a -1 counter on each enemy character. It's good, except why say each? Nobody's ever team attacking into this thing. Ever. The bleed acid power, I think C-Stacks was the first person I heard mention it, but that power should be on all of the aliens. I totally agree. And I think all the aliens could have 2 health. And some of them would still be bad. Honestly. This is a good power. It sucks that it's limited to this one character, because as far as theme goes, I feel like Bleeding Acid is like, that's the thing all the aliens do, man. I don't get it. So if you're on Xenomorphs, this is a 3-drop that's certainly playable. It's a guy you're probably going to want to play compared to the other 3-drop Xenomorph, but we'll get to him in a minute. CMO Clemens, I've seen this dude hit the table exactly one time, and it was in Quarantine Cup 2 against Mitch, and he was playing Kate Pride Kingpin, and I was playing Kate Pride Groot, and he used CMO Clemens to heal wounds off of Kingpin, and it wasn't enough. I have, since this card was printed, I've said that having to pay 2 resources, one of which is Earth, and it cannot be overstated that Earth, all basic locations are not the same. Earth and space are more expensive for your deck because there's just less of them around. Now, admittedly, you build your deck and then there's the same, you have your 8 spaces or your 8 Urs or whatever, but that requires a higher degree of specialization. There are way more cards that use red, green, blue, and yellow, and therefore, if I have some greens in my deck and maybe I'm not going to use them all for this purpose, I can throw in whatever other supporting character that can kind of maybe take advantage of those same resources. Whereas if you're running spaces and Urs, there's a far fewer number of characters that can take advantage of those. So you're going to be a much more specialized deck, which is going to lessen your options. Lesser options, as we talked about earlier in this, we always want more options. As serious high-level card players, if we want to improve, if we want to do better, maintaining lots of options all the way through, both in terms of how we play the game, but also how we build our decks before the game, is very important. CMO Clemens requires a degree of specialization that I do not think justifies his heal power, especially when you consider that the medkit now exists. So a 2-cost equipment that costs 1 green to heal a wound. So 2 cards, I guess, plus a predator, 2 cards, heal a wound, or 3 cards, heal a wound. And one of those cards has to be an Earth. And you have to play this body, a 2/6/1 on turn 3. No. Healing is really valuable. It's overcosted here. Yes, there are narrow circumstances where this is going to be the better healing option than Medkit, but outside of those circumstances, and even in those circumstances, I don't think this guy's worth it. I think I'd rather have something that could prevent a wound from hitting my main character than rely on this to heal the wound off. Within Battles Royale, I don't think you play this guy. I don't think he does enough. Parker, move an enemy front row character to its back row and remove all the +1 counters. Removing +1 counters is super useful. That has been a valuable skill for the whole game. It's one of the reasons why Daze is such a good plot twist. Spook is such a good plot twist. Putting that on a 3/5 body with 1 health and costing a blue, probably not worth it. I have run this guy in company decks, and when you need him, he's fine. When all the other times, he just, I don't know. I'm not very impressed with Parker, I'm afraid. Salivating Xenomorph, 2/4/1. Not a big fan of that stat block on turn 3. And you pay yellow if you have fewer than 3 cards in hand, draw until you have 3. Maybe in Newborn you want to deal with this guy. Pretty much every other use case, I would rather have other ways to draw cards. I do not want to rely on this guy as my card draw mechanic. If I'm playing Battles Royale and Newborn's my main character, I probably play this guy. Outside of that, I probably don't play this guy. Bishop, another synthetic, so he's got the 3 health, and he's a 4/4, and I actually think this card is pretty good. You can pay a yellow and an earth to recruit Bishop instead of playing his recruit cost. If you can do that on turn 1, if you can get a 4/4 with 3 health out on turn 1, you can legitimately try to protect some things. You can legitimately go to work, start putting some wounds on some things. However, he gets worse over the course of the game, and if it's turn 5 or 6, you're probably better off just paying the 4 for him than paying the 2 resources. This is an expensive cost. 2 resources to get 1 4/4 out onto the board is a high cost, but if you're doing it on turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, it's probably worth it. Later in the game, you probably just want to pay this guy for 4. Yes, there may be circumstances where you want to get him plus another thing out and have a burst of potential damage on the board in the form of team attacking or whatever. I think this card is playable. Admittedly, his stat block or his power is pretty expensive. And if you're going to do this on turn 1, that means 3 out of your 7 cards had to be this and the 2 resources, which means what's the rest of your hand look like? So I think there's applications for Bishop, and it's certainly a card I've played, but I'm not crazy about him. Can't be ignored. Anytime you can get stats on the board for free, it's worth looking at. This isn't exactly free, but it doesn't cost recruit points, and your ability to use locations isn't throttled in the same way that recruit points are. So if you're on this box for Battles Royale, I definitely think this is a guy worth looking at, no matter who your main character is. But sadly, I think he's been power crept out. I think if this card was printed today, he would only cost the 1 earth, and he might be a 5/5, honestly. Well, actually, if we just look at the Predators box, Mr. Black was a 5/5 that you only had to pay a blue to get out. So you can kind of see how he got power crept year over year. Aliens came out, and then Predators came out exactly a year later at the subsequent Gen Con, and there's a 5-drop that fills almost the same role as Bishop, but is just a little bit better. Christie, 6/3/1 with range. This is a card nobody played, nobody cares about, except that if you stun a defending enemy character, you stun every other enemy character with the same name. So if you are in some kind of illustrated format where there are also photographic cards, this card kills Outriders. If you're not in a format where Outriders exist, there's no reason to look at Christie. Screeching Xenomorph. Pay a green, put 2 +1 counters on a character with Swarm on your side and each other character on your side with the same name. If you can get a bunch of 1 health guys with Swarm on the board, cool. I think this card might be better now than it was when it came out. At the time it came out, you just never got value out of it. You just cannot get these stupid Xenomorphs to stick to the board. There are more Swarm things now. Like this guy in a Sentinel deck might make a lot of sense. This guy in a Battles Royale deck, I just don't think you're going to be getting that value. Maybe you run 1 or 2 of this guy just in the Unicorn Fairy Rainbow Land where you actually stick a bunch of characters with the same name to the board, but I think that's pretty unlikely. This guy needed like 2 health or like 2 more defense or just something. It's just not enough. It's just not a good enough card. Xenomorph Spitter, pay a blue, put 2 -1 counters on an enemy character, and then you get to repeat it for each Xenomorph Spitter on your side. So again, this is a card that if you can get multiples of this in play, his power gets better and better and better. And that's cool, but when you actually sit down at the game, a 4 defense, and this is a Xenomorph with range, which is unusual, but a 4 defense 4-drop, it's just not good enough to survive. Maybe if this guy had 2 health. Maybe if he had 2 health, so I play out the 1, and then the next turn I get to play another, and then I get to use this and put 4 -1 counters somewhere. Like, that could be cool. It never happens. I've never seen it happen. I just think this card is held back by how fragile its defense value is and the fact that it only has 1 health. The power has the potential to be good, but between the cost, the health, and the defense, it never triggers. We already talked about facehuggers. Brother Dylan. Pan-Earth, put a character from your KO pile on the bottom of your deck, and then use that character's attack and defense as a buff for your main character for the turn. Okay, you got to get characters into your KO pile that have stats that are relevant, which means you want something that's at least like 3 attack, 3 defense. Like for me, 3 is kind of the break point where a combat buff goes from useful to good. Like I want combat ability. I want the ability to manipulate combat by 3. How late in the game before I can do this? Maybe in Newborn, this guy's good. You start with Newborn, you throw out some high cost characters early in the game, play this guy on 5, and now all of a sudden your Newborn gets, I don't know, +7, +6, +8, +8, that kind of stuff. That could be decent. It feels like there could be something here. I've never seen it work out practically. There's been a lot of thought put into how to make Brother Dylan good, and it's just never panned out. All right, Private Hudson. So this is a 5-cost guy. If he gets KO'd, you wound your main character. He's a 5/7/1. None of that's great. The stats are okay. The stats are fine, but wounding your main character if he gets KO'd and he only has 1 health, terrible. So you want some of this. Any combat, stun a character that is melee attacking a character on your side. You can use this power any number of times each turn. Notice how there's no cost on this superpower? Well, this is how this card was printed. And as I said earlier, at Gen Con, when this came out, these cards were legally playable at the event that happened. So Gen Con started on a Thursday or whatever day. Yeah, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. It's a 4-day event. So it starts on Thursday. The first time people can get into the cards and actually read what these cards are. And then the Saturday, you have to play this guy who has a colossal misprint. His power is actually supposed to cost a red symbol. Now this photograph, I got it from C-Stacks. I don't know if he's the one who originally took it or where the photograph, who the original photographer was. But again, I got it from C-Stacks. This was on the Upper Deck, the counter at the Upper Deck booth at Gen Con to let people know that Private Hudson is always a screw up and you have to pay a skill, which who calls red skill? Nobody. I get that green is might, but nobody says might. Everybody just says green. Nobody says energy. They just say blue. So, which brings me to another critique. So you want some of this is in huge print, which is the name of the power. And this commentary down here is in fairly large print, so it's easily read. It's black ink, which is a color that makes sense. And then right in the middle here, you have this thing telling you you need to use red locations written in blue ink. Just make it all black if that's what you're going to do. Don't change the color to a different color that isn't the color you're referring to. What are you doing? And it's written in cursive, which I have long been on the record as thinking cursive is stupid and nobody should write that way because it's just sloppy. So that's Private Hudson, and this is the way he's supposed to be played. And this has been a lot of little trips down versus history on this set review. I did not set out with that being my plan, but here we ended up. So one other thing about Hudson, though, that I find kind of surprising is I don't think this power being free would have totally broken this card. There is a huge drawback to this guy getting stunned off, and his power only triggers during melee attacks. So if I can come at this guy with range, his power is totally irrelevant. Maybe the any number of times each turn part could have gone away if they wanted to make this just a keyword. So the first time a character attacks Hudson, if it's a melee attack, stun that character. That, to me, seems like a much better use of this power than an infinite use power that costs red, that doesn't even say on the card that it costs red. So that's Hudson. We'll move on. 5-cost Dragon. Now, this is one of the xenomorphs that I actually think is good. 3 health. 3 health is always going to be respectable. 7 attack on turn 5 is respectable. 2 defense kind of sucks, but he's got 3 health, so his low defense doesn't matter that much to me. He can leap, so you get to smash people in the back row, even if they've got front row defenders. And and he has the ability to heal, which is huge. So you have a 3 defense guy that can heal wounds and can swing more or less all the way up the curve. 7 attack is going to get you into 7 drops. It's not going to get you into any 8 drops, but you're not going to see any 8 drops in Battles Royale anyway. So in terms of bang for your buck, like attack that you can put out, this guy conceivably could put 21 attack into the opposing board. If he gets stunned every time he attacks and you never heal him, 7, 7, 7, that's pretty good for 5 costs. This is a playable card. I actually like the dragon as a supporting character. Perfect Organism. This is probably the only other xenomorph that I'm going to say that I like. He's ferocious, which I'm always a big fan of ferocious. 4/8/2 is fine stats on turn 5. 8 defense means he's probably not going to get hit back. 4 is kind of weak for his attack, but his power lets him strike with double his attack, or if you amplify it, strike with triple his attack. So he's coming in at 12 attack on turn 5 if you're chucking the yellow that you're paying from hand. That's pretty good. To compare that to like a modern day card, Cersei is a 6-drop that has 12 attack. So Perfect Organism has aged very well and has not been power crept out. Yes, you have to pay to get his attack that big. Cersei is printed at 12, but he's also a 5-drop instead of a 6-drop, and he's 2 health instead of 1 health. So it's not a totally comparable comparison, but in terms of wanting to get work done, put wounds on dudes, Perfect Organism can do that. It does kind of seem like the 5 slot for the Xenomorphs is where they shine. That's where they excel. These are probably the best supporting characters on the team. Ash. This card is not playable other than one famous narrow example from Versus history. So this guy's a 3/3, which is terrible on a 6-drop. He has 3 health like all the other synthetics. When he appears, you can put him into another player's back row. At the start of your main phase, stun another character on your side. Move Ash to another player's back row to cost a yellow. So I play him on 6, and I can give him to you. On your turn, when you enter your main phase, you have to stun somebody, and then you have the ability to pay a yellow and send him back to me and put me into that situation. Generally, this is not a playable card, but if you play him in Kingpin, where you have basically infinite resources and you have Taskmaster, John Phillips famously made a combo with Taskmaster, Ash, Kingpin, and I think he went to top 8 at Gen Con the year that he played that combo. So narrow use case for this guy. Outside of it, he's never going to see play. You're not going to play this card in Battles Royale. It would be insane to play this card in Battles Royale. Use your turn 6 to give your opponent a body. I mean, I guess if you have total board control and they have an empty hand, so you know for sure that the only other character on their side during their turn at the start of their main phase is going to be their main character, so you can guarantee Ash is going to put a wound on their main character. Maybe in that Unicorn, Fairy, Rainbow land, you can play Ash. Outside of that, this guy, keep him at home. Ash is fine. Yeah, he's fine for me to put my drink on. Johnner. He gets +5/+5 on melee combat, so he's a 10 attack if you put him in the front row. It kind of sucks that you have to choose between a slightly understated 6-drop with range or a very overstated 6-drop with melee. He's worth playing. I wish he had 2 health. I wish this guy had 2 health so that you could get a couple uses out of him. Certainly a card that can see some play. Within the Battles Royale format, he's probably good enough. If this is your Battles Royale box, I think Johnner is probably... I mean, he's certainly the best 6-drop on your team if you want to play something that actually stays on your side of the board. If you want to play this guy and hope that your opponent can't deal with him in some way, I guess I don't play Ash. If I had to be on company and pick a 6-drop, I'm picking Johnner 100% of the time. Newborn. He's got Monstrous, and you can give him +2 green counters or +5 green counters. I think if this is your 6-drop, you're going to hoard greens in your hand because you don't want to use this guy's power if you can't amplify it. The difference between an 8/8 and an 11/11 is pretty big. This is definitely a playable 6-drop. With 2 health, you're hopefully going to be able to get some work done with him. You know, maybe you play him out, make him big, swing in, get something. They're able to overcome it, but then you can make him big again. I think Newborn's playable, if a somewhat expensive 6-drop. It's the only 6-drop option the Xenomorphs have, so if you're on a Xenomorph deck, probably you got to play this guy. Yeah, it is true that your opponent has to have exactly a yellow to ship Ash back to you. That's true. Again, I want to play cards that do stuff. And when you play Ash, particularly the late game turns, 6, 7, 8, if the card doesn't have some kind of immediate impact, if it doesn't have a coming into play ability that's impactful or give me some stats that I can do something with, I'm not generally a big fan, because turn 6, 7, 8, you're probably looking at the latter half of your hit point pool. You've got some wounds stacked. I would rather play a guy that's 10-10 that I can do something to. And if my opponent doesn't have any range, then Johnner is even harder to get over, versus play this guy. And if they have some trash mobs, like, okay, I'll recruit a 1-drop. Cool. Stunned it. Thanks for the 3 attack. Not a big fan. Not a big fan. Corporal Hicks. So this is another card I don't like that has somewhat controversially I don't like. This card in particular in the old days of Pixie Max, where you would have your Pixie Max. No. Pixie Sing. Further back. So the original Singularity let you move characters out of play for free. You didn't have to pay the blue every turn like the reprinted version that came out in Legacy? Shield versus Hydra? I don't remember when the reprinted Singularity came out, but whenever it was, now you have to pay to use her power. Before that, in the days when people were running Pixie, getting a Thanos out on turn 3, you've got your Pixie, you've got your Singularity, you get your Thanos out, you RFG the Thanos that should have been KO'd by Pixie using Singularity's power, and the next turn Thanos comes back and he's just on the board. Now you just have an 8-drop on turn 4. Earlier if you're running Dark Phoenix. Corporal Hicks had a slot in those decks because you're not attacking with your Singularity. You don't want to risk crashing her into somebody and then not being able to use her end of turn trigger. You often could control the board by getting big drops out early, so you're maybe not attacking with all your characters. So what you would do is play this guy, and then at the end of turn you get to drop 2+1 counters onto your Singularity, which gets her up to an 8 defense. Hicks goes away, all your other guys go away, comes back, and it's a way to accelerate the advantage that you have when you're abusing that Pixie Singularity combo that doesn't work anymore. Outside of that narrow use case, I have never liked this guy. This guy is a win more character. I'm attacking with my characters. In most games, I'm turning all my guys sideways and I'm swinging and stuff. So I don't think, I got to go back to Ash here in a second, but I don't think Corporal Hicks gets enough done. If you're ahead in the game and you're not turning your guys sideways, yes, he allows you to win more. Outside of that win more scenario, 7 attack on turn 7 with range, okay, that's playable, but as soon as you attack with him, he doesn't benefit. Well, he doesn't benefit from his own power anyway. So, and that's the thing. I want to be able to attack with my characters. This guy gives me incentive to not attack. And if I don't already have a board, if I'm not already ahead, he's just not doing anything. He just doesn't do enough. So I got some comments in the chat here saying that Ash gives you 3 free stuns. He only gives you 3 free stuns if your opponent sucks. Because if you give me Ash, he's not sticking around all those turns. We're going to get this guy turned face down. We're going to deal with him. And I have the ability to play low drop characters out to the board. So even if he's stunning stuff, okay, I'll throw a 1-drop out, let Ash stun that guy, and then start stacking wounds on the Ash. I don't see it. I'll say this: get a hold of me on Discord or Facebook with a list that's not John Phillips' Kingpin list, where Ash plays a relevant role, and I'll take a look at it. And if I'm wrong, if there is a use case for this card outside of that narrow combo deck, I will absolutely acknowledge that. I haven't seen it. I played with this guy some when he first came out. I actually thought he might be good. If we go way back and look at the spoiler for this card, in my initial review, I reviewed him somewhat favorably. Having played him for some number of years now, I don't see it. All right, last card. 8/8/2 is the only part of the Queen that I care about. 8/8 stat block on a 7-drop is good. 2 health on a 7-drop is good. Leader is a relevant power, so if you're doing team attacks, you can force your opponent to stun stuff that's good for you and bad for them. Her ability to pay a blue and search your deck, hand, and KO pile for Ovomorphs and put them into play. This is maybe the best use case scenario for Ovomorphs, is if you get the queen down and then you can hide the Ovomorphs behind her, and she has such a big stat block for the drop. That's about it. And you have to survive to turn 7, and you have to have the Ovomorphs in your deck, which means maybe you drew them earlier. And again, I wanted to love Ovomorphs, but in practice, they have just not panned out. So altogether, the Aliens expansion as a set, is it worth buying? 100%. If you have any kind of interest in playing Versus at a high level, Kain and Call are absolute must-have cards. You cannot avoid these cards if you're a serious Versus player. If you like Aliens, I think there's a lot to love about this box, particularly if you play it against the other stuff in this box or against the stuff in the Predators box. There's like some great theme battles that can happen there. And outside of the full card pool, some of the weaknesses that are in the set in this expansion aren't as relevant. They aren't as obvious. In the Battles Royale format, I think this is the absolute bottom of the stack. I think if you're choosing between all the different 200 card expansions, the Aliens card expansion is clearly and obviously the weakest out of those options. Doesn't mean all the cards in here are bad, although a lot of them have been kind of power crept into obsolescence over the years. So if you're going to play Battles Royale, this is probably not the box I would pick at all. This is the box I would only play if I was forced to. Even though there is some fun, interesting stuff in here. So if I had to give this set a grade on theme, I would give it an A. On overall game mechanic balance in terms of how it interacts with the card pool as a whole, I would say maybe like a C+, and without Kain and Call, this expansion would be like a D probably, in terms of how impactful a lot of the cards are overall. So that's the set review for Aliens. I'm going to try to be a little bit more regular with the set reviews, but as things happen in the community, there's other stuff that I want to live stream, and this is a little bit more of an evergreen type content. So until next time,